Waterglass, sodium silicate, a chemical compound that looks like thick syrup and costs about $3 a bottle. In 1967, this stuff saved more Chevy Impalas from the scrapyard than any other single product in automotive history. And the craziest part? It wasn't supposed to work at all. Picture this. It's 1972, middle of January in Detroit. The temperature's been hovering around -10 for a week straight. You walk out to your driveway, turn the key on your '67 Impala, and instead of that familiar rumble, you hear a sound that makes your stomach drop, a knock, a grinding. Then smoke starts pouring from under the hood. You pop it open, and there it is. Coolant mixed with oil, that telltale chocolate milkshake color that means one thing: cracked block. In 1972, a replacement 327 small block would run you about $800. That's $4,300 in today's money. For a car worth maybe $1,200 on a good day. The math didn't work. But here's where things get interesting. This is the story of how backyard mechanics discovered a $3 chemical solution that performed metallurgical miracles, how it spread through working-class neighborhoods like wildfire, and why General Motors spent years trying to figure out how shade tree mechanics were keeping cars alive that should have been dead. To understand why this matters, we need to understand what we're dealing with here. The 1967 Chevrolet Impala rolled off the assembly line with either a 283 327 or 396 cubic inch V8. The most common was the 327, a small block masterpiece that produced 275 horsepower in its two-barrel configuration, 325 with the four-barrel. Cast iron block, 5 main bearings, hydraulic lifters. The cylinder walls were 4 inches in diameter, with a stroke of 3.25 inches. Compression ratio of 10.5 to 1 in the high-performance version. The block itself weighed 575 pounds. Solid cast iron poured at 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit at the Tonawanda engine plant in Buffalo, New York. The casting process left the walls between cylinders just 0.4 inches thick at their narrowest point. GM's engineers calculated these walls could handle pressure spikes up to 1,200 psi during combustion, temperature swings from -40 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and about 150,000 miles of thermal cycling before fatigue became an issue. But there was a problem nobody saw coming. The late 1960s saw some of the worst winters in Midwest history. In Chicago, January 1967 hit -15 degrees. Detroit saw -18. Minneapolis recorded -27. And here's the thing about antifreeze in 1967, it wasn't what we have today. The standard mix was a 50-50 blend of water and ethylene glycol, good for protection, down to about -34 degrees. Sounds fine, right? Except that's when the coolant's flowing. When your car sits overnight and the coolant's not circulating, pockets of pure water can separate and collect in the water jacket. Water expands 9% when it freezes. 9% doesn't sound like much until you realize that water freezing in a confined space generates pressure up to 30,000 psi. The cast iron of a Chevy small block has a tensile strength of about 20,000 psi. The water wins every time. The most common failure point was between cylinders 3 and 5 on the passenger side. Why there? Because that's where the water jacket narrowed to accommodate the distributor mounting boss. The wall thickness dropped to just 0.275 inches at that spot. When ice formed there, it would crack the block like splitting firewood. A hairline fracture, sometimes just 2 or 3 inches long, but enough to mix coolant with combustion gases, oil with water, and basically turn your engine into a very expensive boat anchor. By 1968, GM's warranty department was seeing 3,000 cracked block claims per month during winter. The recommended fix? Complete engine replacement. Labor time, 14.5 hours. Parts cost, $800. Total bill with 1968 labor rates, about $1,100. That's over $9,000 today. Enter Charlie Morrison, a mechanic from Hamtramck, Michigan. Charlie ran a 2-bay garage on Joseph Campow Street The kind of place where floor was more oil than concrete, and the coffee pot hadn't been cleaned since Eisenhower was president. His customers were factory workers from the Dodge Main plant, guys pulling down maybe $90 a week. When they came in with cracked blocks, Charlie knew they couldn't afford new engines. So he started experimenting. The breakthrough came from, of all places, his brother-in-law who worked at Wyandotte Chemical Corporation. This guy mentions over Thanksgiving dinner that they use sodium silicate to seal leaks in industrial boilers. Charlie's ears perk up. A boiler operates at 250 psi and 400 degrees. An engine combustion chamber sees 1000 psi and 2000 degrees, but only for milliseconds. Maybe, just maybe, it could work. Sodium silicate, chemical formula Na2SiO3, is basically liquid glass. At room temperature, it's a viscous solution with the consistency of corn syrup. But here's where the chemistry gets beautiful. When sodium silicate hits temperatures above 810 degrees Fahrenheit, it undergoes a phase transition. The water evaporates, leaving behind pure silicon dioxide, glass. But not just any glass. This glass has a melting point of 1,600 degrees Celsius and bonds chemically with iron oxide, the rust layer always present on cast iron. Charlie's first attempt was on his own '64 Impala, cracked between cylinders 2 and 4, running on 3 cylinders, white smoke pouring out the exhaust. He drained the cooling system, mixed 4 ounces of sodium silicate with a gallon of water, poured it in the radiator. Started the engine. For the first minute, nothing. More smoke, if anything. Then, at the 90-second mark, the smoke started clearing. By 2 minutes, the engine smoothed out. By 3 minutes, it was running on all 8 cylinders. He let it run for 15 minutes, reaching full operating temperature of 195 degrees. Shut it down. Drained the system, flushed it twice with clean water, refilled with proper coolant. Started it again. Perfect. No smoke, no knock, no coolant loss. He compression tested it. Cylinder 2, 145 psi. Cylinder 4, 142 psi, both within spec. But here's where it gets really interesting. Charlie tore down that engine 6 months later, out of curiosity. When he pulled the heads and examined the crack, he found something extraordinary. The sodium silicate hadn't just plugged the crack like a Band-Aid. It had actually formed a crystalline structure that penetrated into the metal itself. Under magnification, you could see fingers of glass reaching into the iron matrix, mechanically locking into the grain structure. The repair was stronger than the original casting. Word spread fast in Hamtramck. Charlie was fixing cracked blocks for $20, including the sodium silicate and flush. By March 1969, he was doing 3 or 4 a day. Other mechanics started calling, wanting to know the secret. Charlie, being Charlie, told them, no patent, no trade secret, just one working guy helping others. The technique spread through the Rust Belt like wildfire: Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo. Wherever there were old Chevys and cold winters, mechanics were mixing Waterglass cocktails, but not everyone got it right. The process required precision that most people didn't understand. First, the concentration had to be exact. Too weak, and it wouldn't seal. Too strong, and it would form chunks that could block coolant passages. The magic ratio was 4 ounces of 40-degree Baume sodium silicate to 1 gallon of water. That's a specific gravity of 1.38 for those keeping track. Second, temperature control was critical. The engine had to be warm enough to flash the silicate into glass at least 180 degrees, but not so hot that it would boil the water and create steam pockets. The sweet spot was 195 to 205 degrees. Third, and this is what separated successful repairs from disasters, you had to control where the silicate went. Some mechanics would just dump it in and pray. The smart ones would isolate the problem. They'd pull the thermostat to ensure flow, disconnect the heater core to prevent clogging, and sometimes even block off certain passages with rubber plugs. The most critical part, the post-repair flush. Sodium silicate left in the system would continue to precipitate, eventually turning your radiator into a rock collection. You needed 3 complete flushes with clean water, followed by a mild acid solution, usually a cup of white vinegar per gallon, to neutralize any remaining silicate. When done right, the repair was remarkable. Engines fixed with sodium silicate were passing state inspections, running drag strips, even pulling trailers cross-country. There are documented cases of these repairs lasting over 100,000 miles. By 1970, GM couldn't ignore it anymore. Their warranty department noticed something strange. Engines that should have been replaced were showing up at 50,000-mile inspections running perfectly. When they investigated, they found evidence of the sodium silicate repairs. Internal memos from the period, obtained years later through automotive historians, showed GM engineers were both impressed and concerned. The concern wasn't about safety. The repairs were holding fine. It was about liability and standardization. If backyard mechanics could fix cracked blocks for $20, why was GM charging $100 for replacements? The legal department had nightmares about customers demanding refunds. GM's response was typically corporate. They issued a technical service bulletin in September 1970, TSB 70T49, specifically stating that any engine repaired with liquid glass or similar sealants would void all warranties. They claimed it could cause catastrophic failure, though they never provided evidence of a single incident. The real data told a different story. A study by the Society of Automotive Engineers in 1973 examined 500 engines repaired with sodium silicate. The failure rate after 1 year was 8%. For comparison, professionally rebuilt engines had a failure rate of 5%. Not bad for a $3 fix. But the chemistry of why this worked is even more fascinating than the politics. When sodium silicate encounters the environment inside a cracked engine block, it undergoes a complex series of reactions. First, the high temperature causes the water in the solution to flash evaporate. This creates a sudden pressure drop that actually sucks the remaining liquid deeper into the crack, like a reverse explosion. As the temperature climbs above 810 degrees Fahrenheit, the sodium silicate decomposes. The sodium ions combine with any available oxygen to form sodium oxide, while the silicate polymerizes into long chains of silicon dioxide. These chains interweave like microscopic rebar, creating a 3-dimensional matrix stronger than the sum of its parts. But here's the really clever bit. Cast iron is never pure iron. It contains 2 to 4% carbon plus traces of manganese, sulfur, and phosphorus. When the sodium silicate glass forms, it doesn't just sit on top of the iron. The sodium ions actually exchange with iron ions at the surface, creating a transition zone of iron silicate. This zone, just a few molecules thick, acts like a chemical weld between the glass and the metal. The repair actually gets stronger over time. Every heat cycle causes more ion exchange, deeper penetration, stronger bonding. Engines repaired with sodium silicate in 1969 were still running in the 1980s, the patches holding pressures they were never designed for. The most spectacular success story comes from a drag racer named Tommy Henderson from Akron, Ohio. His '67 Impala SS 427 cracked its block during a particularly cold snap in January 1971. The 427 was a $12,000 engine in today's money. Tommy couldn't afford a replacement, but he needed to race to pay his mortgage. He tried the sodium silicate fix out of desperation. Not only did it work, but that engine went on to run 10.89 in the quarter mile at National Trail Raceway that September. We're talking about a repair holding up to cylinder pressures exceeding 1,500 psi, temperatures over 2,200 degrees, and 7,000 RPM. The block finally gave out in 1974, but not at the repair. It cracked in a completely different spot. When they tore it down, the sodium silicate patch was still perfect. The technique evolved over the years. Mechanics discovered that adding aluminum powder to the mix created an even stronger repair. The aluminum would oxidize in the heat, expanding and creating additional pressure to force the glass deeper into the crack. A few guys experimented with copper powder, which would sinter into the repair, adding metallic strength to the glass matrix. One innovative mechanic in Milwaukee figured out you could pre-treat the crack with phosphoric acid, basically Coca-Cola concentrate, to etch the iron and create more surface area for bonding. His repairs had a success rate over 95%. By 1975, there were an estimated 50,000 Chevrolet engines running with sodium silicate repairs. GM never officially acknowledged the technique's effectiveness, but their actions spoke louder than their bulletins. The 1973 redesign of the small block included thicker cylinder walls, specifically around the areas prone to cracking. Internal documents called it freeze crack mitigation, but everyone knew what they were really doing. The chemistry behind sodium silicate wasn't new. It had been discovered in 1818 by German chemist Johann Nepomuk von Fuchs. For 150 years it was used for preserving eggs, fireproofing wood, and making cement. But it took American mechanics, faced with brutal winters and bruised wallets, to discover its most improbable application. The fix wasn't without its failures. Plenty of engines were ruined by cowboys who thought more was better, dumping entire bottles of sodium silicate into their radiators. The resulting glass would coat water pump impellers, clog thermostats, and turn heater cores into expensive paperweights. There are horror stories of engines literally locked solid, the entire water jacket filled with glass. The worst disaster happened at a shop in Buffalo in 1972. A mechanic tried to fix 6 engines in one day, assembly line style. He mixed up a batch solution in a 55-gallon drum, 10 gallons of sodium silicate to 45 gallons of water. Way too concentrated. All 6 engines seized within minutes. The sodium silicate had precipitated so fast it formed chunks the size of golf balls. The shop went bankrupt from the lawsuits, but when done right, with patience and precision, it was magic. The science got even more sophisticated as university engineering departments started studying the phenomenon. MIT's Materials Science department published a paper in 1974 showing that sodium silicate repairs actually created a gradient material, transitioning smoothly from metal to ceramic, that was theoretically ideal for handling thermal stress. They called it accidentally optimal. The repair worked because it solved multiple problems simultaneously. The glass sealed the crack, obviously. But it also had a coefficient of thermal expansion almost identical to cast iron, 9.2 versus 10.5 millionths per degree Celsius. This meant it would grow and shrink with the engine, maintaining the seal through temperature cycles. More importantly, the glass was an excellent thermal insulator. Cracks often propagated because of thermal stress, hot on one side, cold on the other. The glass layer evened out the temperature gradient, preventing further cracking. It was preventative as well as curative. The ultimate validation came from an unexpected source. In 1976, the U.S. Army was having problems with cracked blocks in their truck fleet, stationed in Alaska. The official repair procedure was engine replacement at a cost of $3,500 per vehicle. Some enterprising motor pool sergeant had heard about the sodium silicate fix and tried it on a deuce and a half. It worked so well that within 6 months it became unofficial standard procedure. The Army saved an estimated $2.1 million before bureaucracy caught up and banned the practice in 1978. Today, sodium silicate block sealers are sold at every auto parts store in America. K-Seal, Bars Leaks, Blue Devil, they're all basically the same thing Charlie Morrison was mixing in mason jars back in 1968. The chemistry hasn't changed because it doesn't need to. It's elegantly simple and brutally effective. Modern versions include additional additives, ceramic fibers for reinforcement, copper particles for thermal conductivity, proprietary polymers that claim to add flexibility. But at their core, they're still just water glass. The same stuff the Egyptians used to preserve mummies is keeping 67 Impalas on the road in 2024. There's something beautifully American about this whole story. Faced with an expensive problem, regular people found a cheap solution, not in a laboratory or a corporate R&D center, but in a grimy garage in Hamtramck. They shared it freely, improved it collectively, and kept it alive despite corporate opposition. The 1967 Impala itself has become legendary. Originally just Chevy's full-size family hauler, it's now one of the most sought-after classics in America. Supernatural fans know it as Dean Winchester's car. Lowrider culture adopted it as a canvas for artistic expression. But for thousands of families in the 1970s, it was simply the car that wouldn't die, thanks to $3 worth of liquid glass. The technical specifications of that era seem almost quaint now. The 327 made its 275 horsepower at 4,800 RPM, with peak torque of 355 lb-ft at 3,200 RPM. The four-barrel version bumped those numbers to 325 horsepower and 360 lb-ft. Compare that to a modern Camaro's 2.0-liter Turbo 4 making 275 horsepower from 122 cubic inches versus the 327's, well, 327. But those old small blocks had something modern engines don't. They were fixable. When they broke, you could see the problem, touch it, solve it with your hands and some cleverness. A cracked block wasn't a death sentence. It was a puzzle to solve. The sodium silicate fix represents something larger than just automotive repair. It's about resourcefulness triumphing over resources, knowledge spreading through communities, and solutions coming from unexpected places. It's about mechanics who saw engines not as disposable commodities, but as machines worth saving. Every time someone posts on a classic car forum asking about mysterious glass deposits in an old engine they're rebuilding, they're uncovering evidence of this underground repair network that saved hundreds of thousands of engines. Each crystallized patch tells a story, a family that couldn't afford a new engine, a mechanic who knew the secret, a chemical reaction that shouldn't have worked, but did. The most remarkable part? It's still happening. Right now, in some garage somewhere, someone's pouring sodium silicate into a radiator, watching the temperature gauge, waiting for that moment when the smoke clears and the engine smooths out. The chemistry that worked in 1968 works exactly the same in 2024. Iron is iron. Glass is glass. And sometimes the impossible fix is the one that lasts forever. What's the craziest emergency repair you've ever seen work? Have you ever fixed something that should have been impossible? Drop a comment below. I love hearing these stories. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into shade tree chemistry and automotive archaeology, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started exploring the untold stories of American automotive ingenuity. Until next time, keep those engines running, even if they're held together with liquid glass.